Good morning. My name is Askold Melnyczuk. Welcome to another episode of For the Record. Today's broadcast is co-sponsored by Writers for Democratic Action, Agni Magazine, Consequence Forum, Arrowsmith Press, and the Shevchenko Scientific Society. This morning, our guests will help us think about how to talk about war. War is what happens when language fails, writes Margaret Atwood. What's more, once a war has started, language itself is one of its first casualties. It appears to lack the resources needed to convey war's unspeakable realities. But the unspeakable is precisely what we're going to try to talk about today. Those caught up in the madness and turmoil of war are confronted by a bewildering problem. Their house is on fire, and all inside it are shouting for help, while we, at some distance, struggle to make out what we're seeing and hearing. Today, we'll listen in on a conversation between two American writers with direct experience of witnessing and writing about war, and two Ukrainian writers and human rights workers involved in documenting war crimes committed during Russia's ongoing war in Ukraine. To help us see more clearly what often feels like a blur of images and information, we have with us Jackie Leiden, author of the internationally best-selling memoir, Daughter of the Queen of Sheba, widely hailed as a contemporary classic. Jackie Leiden was for over 3 decades an award-winning host on National Public Radio. She's reported on wars and conflicts in Syria, Afghanistan, Iran, Lebanon, Northern Ireland, and elsewhere. She's joined by Christopher Merrill, the award-winning author of over 20 books of poetry, essays, memoir, and translations, who also reported on the war in the Balkans. He is the director of the University of Iowa's celebrated International Writing Program, and in 2012, President Obama appointed him to the National Council on the Humanities. They are joined on the Ukrainian side by novelist, essayist, and human rights activist Victoria Amelina, author of, among other things, the award-winning novel Dom's Dream Kingdom, whose current project is the War and Justice Diary, Looking at Women, Looking at War, and by Roman Avramenko, the executive director of Truth Hounds. Roman has participated in more than 60 field monitoring missions to conflict zones in Ukraine and abroad. Welcome all. I thank you so much for being here with us, and I'm going to turn it over to Chris now.
Thank you, Askold, and thank you, Victoria and Roman, for joining Jackie and me for this vital conversation. We stand in awe of the work that you have been doing during the 6 months of the Russian invasion and occupation of your country. And it seemed, as Askold has pointed out, a good moment to reflect on what it is that you've been doing, what Jackie and I can recall of our experiences in the war zone, and see if we can't find some ways to think our way forward. I wanted to begin with a little quote by the great Polish journalist and writer Ryszard Kapuscinski, who covered something like 27 wars and coups and revolutions. And he said something, this is back during the days of when I was covering the wars of succession in the former Yugoslavia. I always kept this in mind. He said, "It is very difficult to write now because the end of our century is marked by a tremendous acceleration of the historical process. Literature hates this." He went on to suggest that the writer needs a certain quietness and evenness of perspective, a space of time for reflection. There is no distance now. There are some changes that we watch on the television, but there are certain very profound, important transformations which we do not have the opportunity to see. Fiction writers avoid this by writing about marriage, love, things like that. They will not touch the volcano that the world has become. If you try to touch it, to describe it, you find that it requires a new imagination. The problem is not so much with the writing itself as with the creative imagination. The acceleration of history proves that we have a very limited imaginary capacity. We never dreamed the world would become such a rich and various place. Truly, that's what we, I think, have experienced watching you, witnessing the ongoing brutalities of the Russian war machine in Ukraine. And so we thought we'd use that as a starting point to ask each of you, Victoria, then Roman, what it is you've been doing, what's on your minds as the days and nights of this war unfolds. So, Victoria?
Thank you, Christopher. Good day, everyone. Actually, I could not agree more with the statement that language is perhaps one of the first casualties of the war. Basically, all writers whom I know were not able to read books or write books in the February, in March, or even in April, but right now, some of us at least write essays, and I'm actually on my journey writing this War and Justice diary. I actually try to write because it seems also important to tell the world what's going on in Ukraine, to tell the world not just about the war itself, but about Ukraine, because suddenly the world noticed that we do exist. I actually do agree that a fiction writer does need some distance, but there are different ways for us to create such a distance. For instance, my debut novel was on the Dignity Revolution, the Euromaidan that happened in Kiev in 2014, and after which actually Russia first invaded Ukraine. And somehow I managed to find this distance by just introducing the main character, who was just very different from me. He was just an average Ukrainian man, so it was easier for me to create the distance via the character. And right now I'm writing a non-fiction book on quite horrible things, but I'm trying to find the distance in a foreign language. I'm writing it not in Ukrainian, but in English, and this really helps. So some tips from me.
Can you say a little more about how it helps to be using, let's say, the distancing language of English to write this account?
It's just that your native language holds all your emotions, I guess. Every word is full of senses. And right now, every word in Ukrainian is painful. For instance, I would say park in Ukrainian, and I would instantly imagine a park in Bucha, because I love that park and I used to go there. And now Bucha is a synonym of Bucha massacre. I say festival, and I immediately remember our festival in the Donetsk region, the New York festival, which I organized, and for instance, the festivals in Mariupol. So every word holds some piece of pain, at least when you are a writer. But when you do the same in a foreign language, then perhaps it's easier. The language is more like tabula rasa for you. Every word does not hold all those senses.
Wonderful. Roman, can you tell us something about what you've been up to?
Sure. And hi, everyone. Basically, nothing really changed in my life or in my work, because before the invasion, I've been involved into the documentation of war crimes and other international crimes for already almost 8 years. I've been to Donbass region numerous of times. I've been to the annexed Crimea and other regions affected by the conflicts. For instance, in 2020, when the hostilities outbursted in Nagorno-Karabakh, I've been twice to the field mission to train local NGO representatives how to document and also participate in the collecting of the evidence of the war crimes. So on February 24th, I woke up in a quite safe place. We had really thought through all the possible harms and dangers that we could expect in course of the full-scale Russian invasion, we were fully prepared and well set up. So it took for us only 5.5 hours to relaunch our work in a full scale. We continued to monitor and document information of the alleged war crimes. We split the regions of Ukraine between ourselves, and then in early April, when many Ukrainian settlements have been liberated by Ukrainian army, we relaunched our field documenting monitoring missions to these settlements, collecting witness testimonies, observing the crime scenes. It was, of course, a bit surprising for me. Then I used to travel to Donetsk and Luhansk region as to the field documentation trip, and then coming back to relatively safe Kyiv or to Chernihiv, my native town. And then it was quite surprising when I started to document in my native city of Chernihiv. I was walking the same streets I've been walking for many years, but now I observed the destruction. The impact craters from the clusters of ammunition exploded on the street where I walked many times. And I documented direct hit to the kindergarten where I went and where my youngest daughter went. And I still remember this smell of kindergarten food when I was bringing my daughter to that kindergarten, and now it was destroyed and burned, and the smell was totally different. So I would say I didn't expect that any time in my life I would document international crimes in my native city. But if you live in close to Russia, you would need to expect this kind of things to be happened.
I'd just like to respond a little bit to what Chris read and what Victoria was saying about writers not being able to write for months. On February the 24th, I was actually at a writer's colony, and I couldn't imagine a crazier place to be, because I was so far from my previous life where I would have been one of the reporters, on that scene. And I wrote an essay about that sense of disorientation. And I remember the last line was something about, "We are all Ukrainians today." It took a long time before I could start to work that day. But I also want to respond to the Kapuscinski, because I think that, at least as an audio reporter, and of course it's all speech, right? We're all making something from words. You need to frame the experience somehow, and words are the only thing we have. They may not be very good, but unless you're only pictures. So I have always looked for people who could translate that experience. I'm particularly thinking of the Middle East and Afghanistan. I was also our first reporter at the scene and on the air on September 11th, and how dissociating that felt to me, because I was an American and there was no language barrier. But getting back to books, I've always looked for writers, artists, cultural people to help bridge that experience for an audience, because one of the things that is different between journalism and what Victoria and Roman are doing, at least right now, is journalism has a deadline. You've got to finish it in a few hours or by the evening or the next morning, and you have to tell that story. And so trying to get the world's attention when that world is noisy means you need a portal, a way in. And that is something that I've always looked for. And books have served as that bridge for a lot of the people to whom I've spoken, especially fiction. Maybe I could share with you a little excerpt from a library I visited in Baghdad at the university there, which Chris has also been to. But this was just about 5 months after the war had started. And I met this woman who introduced herself as the head librarian. she turned out not to be a librarian at all. She was in this ruined creosote smoke obviously the active smoke was no longer there, but it was still very hard. It was hard for me to breathe. And she was trying to restack the shelves. They had ransacked the Shakespeare, the Jane Austen. The library was devoted to arts and sciences. So there were a lot of English language novels there. I don't know the rules anymore, she said, and I can't stay home forever. I can tell you about this country. Only the powerful ones will survive, and I think the rest of us are doomed. I don't know who I'm working with. No one from before. So I talked to these books, and they talked back to me. It was like a theatrical charade when I began. Everything like it was in another world. And I'm trying to wrest something, some order from this ancient ruined culture. People came from all over the Arab world to this library. My own father's work was here. It took me weeks to face what had happened and to come in here. Sometimes I used to sit here whole days just looking at the books and thinking about putting them back together. One day I started, just picked up a Shakespeare volume and started. Someday I will finish, but not too soon, I hope. And that always has resonated for me, this kind of what you're doing, Victoria, and you're doing in real time with these people. So I'm so mightily impressed by your courage. And Roman, of course, you're getting the raw experience, the first draft, to compose into narratives also for an audience who isn't at the scene.
Yes, I actually kind of right now work for Roman as well. I'm also documenting war crimes as a part of his team, and at the same time, I'm hoping to write about Roman himself and about his experience. As you can tell, even with this episode with the direct hit to the kindergarten, you see it's worth describing. And basically, this is one of the ways how you can talk about those things, because you're not constructing your narrative just around the destruction, but about what was there before. Because with Ukraine, we do have this problem. In the beginning of the war, I think one of our offices made this video where the war would start happening in Paris and other places which people know well. And since they could recognize that this is Paris, this is Tour Eiffel, so everyone, of course, would start empathizing with these people experiencing it. Unfortunately, Ukraine remained invisible, and one of our most prominent writers, Oksana Zabushko, actually pointed out that if you look at the map, you will see a story for each and every country. Each country has its story, but you don't have a story for Ukraine. It was just missing. I mean, we had it. We knew all along that we are those fighting for freedom. But no one joined us in our fight, and no one kind of believed us about what was happening between Russia and Ukraine all this time. Although Roman and his team was working, for instance, since 2014 to have secure evidence of international conflict of actually Russian invasion since 2014. So yes, it is very important for us to also ground ourselves in what was here in Ukraine before the invasion on February 24th. So, for example, as I said, it is important to understand that last summer in Bucha there was International Music Festival. This was Bucha, so it's not like some place where those deaths and destructions were all alone. No, we had the International Music Festival in Bucha, we had Literature Festival in Mariupol, and I'm sure many others. It's just I'm a writer, so I used to go to literature festivals there, and so on and so forth. So it's very important, I think, when talking about war, to start not from February 24th and not even from the year 2014, but to start from the beginning. Sometimes you see in Kharkiv, the history has been tragic all along. So, for instance, I stayed for a week at the literary residence in Kharkiv, and it is located in the apartment building where the most prominent writers, Ukrainian writers, used to live in 1930s. And then it became a tragic place of what we call executed Renaissance. Because almost all those writers were executed one way or another by the Soviet Russian regime. But still, they created beautiful art. So right now, we turned this place, one of the apartments in this building, into a literary residence, and we used to have a vibrant community around this literary residence. We have a wonderful literature museum in Kharkiv. But right now, you see, I'm writing about the director of this Kharkiv Literature Museum, Tatiana Pilipchuk, because she as well has to help documenting war crimes. She stays there because she has to stay. She has a museum to look after, so she helps to find witnesses, to organize logistics for teams like truth hounds and just general prosecutor's office, etc., for all those people and journalists who want to look at the destruction of cultural heritage in the Kharkiv region. For example, other museum was not that lucky, and I'm sure you've heard that the museum of wonderful Ukrainian philosopher Skovoroda was destroyed with direct heat. I'm sure Roman knows more details on what missile it was, etc. But it's pretty obvious, even for me, that it's a clear war crime because this museum is surrounded by wonderful park. So there's nothing else there but this old 18th century building where actually Ukrainian philosopher spent his last days. So it's a historical building and it's now gone.
I can't tell for sure now yet, Victoria, about what particular missile or shell was used to target the museum. But I can totally agree with you that the cultural objects became surprisingly the primary targets for Russian artillery and air forces, and also missile launches. We've been also to Kyiv region, to Ivankiv, to museum where many paintings of the also famous Ukrainian painter,
Maria Primachenko.
Right, Maria Primachenko were kept. So this small museum was hit directly several times. It got several direct hits, and people were evacuating the paintings from the Berlin museum. I've been to Chernihiv region. I've documented attacks on the place where had lived and raised another prominent Ukrainian poet and writer. It was in Pitsky, Chernihiv region. So it's surprising how Russians trying to target the cultural heritage of Ukraine, and especially one incident struck me at the same settlement. There were a monument erected to memorize the victims of the German Nazis, who killed and burned alive 300 people in the church, and they killed another 500 citizens of that village back in 1942, because they were supported the resistance groups operating there in the thick forests of Chernihiv region. And at the place where this church has been burned, people erected a monument with the names of all deceased. And when Russians come this March, they just bombed this monument with their armored vehicle and demolished that because of no sense. So they have come to like save Ukrainians from Nazis, to make this denazification, and at the same time they demolished the monument erected to memorize the victims of the German Nazis, which was like so obvious that the true aim of Russians was entirely not any kind of nazification.
Well, it's to erase a people and their memory. And one of the quickest ways to do that is through the cultural institutions and cultural artifacts. I'm just thinking back in the wars of succession in the former Yugoslavia, speaking with an American literature professor in Sarajevo, and we were talking about the destruction of the National Library there, as well as the Oriental Institute, just priceless collections of texts and manuscripts, illuminated manuscripts and books all going up in ash. And my friend Zvonko Radelkovich said to me, yes, but remember that the people who orchestrated the destruction of the National Library, one was a poet, Radovan Karadzic, the Bosnian Serb war criminal, and another was a professor of English literature, Nikola Koljevic, who not long before the beginning of the siege of Sarajevo gave a speech from the balcony of the National Library against capital punishment. So what a rapid change of events, that he would now be instrumental in the destruction of this place of memory. But the other thing that I've been thinking about as we've been talking here, on my first reporting trip to Sarajevo, I had a conversation with the legendary New York Times reporter, John Burns, who said two things to me that have stayed with me ever since. He said, this story, and he waved his finger around, pointing to the Serbian guns who occupied all the high ground around Sarajevo. He said, this story writes itself. And I could understand that. And then he said that the New York Times had recently done a survey of its readers. Burns's pieces were almost always on the front page, often above the fold. We imagine that the New York Times readers are the most sophisticated readers in America, the real news hounds. And what the Times discovered was that only about 19% of the Times readers were actually reading his articles coming out of Bosnia. And they were articles that, among other things, would win him a Pulitzer Prize. But there's a way in which the general population doesn't want to have too much knowledge about things like Sarajevo, where only 8 years before the siege began, they were hosting a brilliantly successful Winter Olympics, or Bucha, where there was a music festival, and there's kindergartens, and there's all this stuff of life. At a certain point, the human mind, then imagination, begins to shut it down because it's too much to take in. And so that makes me wonder what the writer can do to try to counteract that, to try to not only collect the evidence, but to frame it in such a way that people will care and will continue to care.
Can I just, one point about that is that even here in the US, we have targeted cultural symbols. I'm thinking when you were speaking about Bucha, and the museum where the victims of the Germans were executed a second time, if you will, the second execution of a Renaissance. We've erased a lot of indigenous people here and a lot of their symbols and a lot of their history and even very ancient ones. And I think that what people do sense, and our challenge as writers, is that there is an evil out there, and how much of a given day can they absorb it? And I don't think all we can do is our best. And I think that there will be a generation more looking at the work that Victoria and Roman are doing, and so many others are doing now, because if there's one thing I've learned over a long career, it's that war doesn't end. And the victims of an atrocity, or my own translator was killed by an American soldier, I've had a close and intimate view of what happened to his family, what happened to his parents, his brother, his daughter, his wife eventually remarried another translator who went to work for the U.S. Army. I mean, stories that you almost can't, a fiction writer might not be believed if they had written that story. The new husband, who was also a friend, although not, he'd been one of NPR's translator. I met him because he was in that classroom studying Bertolt Brecht after the war, and now he's an intelligence officer with NORAD and CENTCOM. So, you know, people have to channel, and we have to help them do that. We have to help them cut grooves in the ennui of daily life, which isn't particularly, I think, easy here. But of course, it is not like seeing your children destroyed at kindergarten or your pregnant mothers targeted. Or there is, I will say, the unbelievable heinousness of this has certainly gotten attention. I was just recently visiting a friend in northern Wisconsin, and there is a Ukrainian candle. There's a candle company. They're making these yellow and blue Ukrainian candles, and they've raised $1 million selling these things. And so people, that's the other thing. You have to give people tools by which they feel they can do something. Maybe it's only money, but maybe it's some other type of witness. And that's, we're all part of the story. It's important to let people feel that.
Yes, thank you so much. I could not agree more. And actually, I do think that it is important during a war not to show people only in grief and despair, because this is not the reality. I mean, maybe every war correspondent is trying to find this, you know, the most horrible story. But at the same time, you know, we here in Ukraine, even those who fight and stay in the trenches, or those who document horrible war crimes, even those, I mean, I've been working for one day with a group who is trying to identify the rest of the bodies in Bucha. And even they sometimes laugh, because this is human nature, because this is how we can survive through it all. So it is important to show that we are humans and we're not, you know, crying constantly. Recently, you know, when we had this wonderful, I think, exhibit of destroyed Russian tanks on the main square of Kyiv, I just walked one evening. I was upset, and I decided to walk to Maidan and see those destroyed tanks. Maybe they will, you know, somehow brighten my day. Well,
they will cheer you up.
Sorry?
Just to cheer you up a little bit to attend this parade.
Yeah, that was the idea. And actually, I saw a lot of people who were really happy. I mean, I felt no alone anymore, because there were many Ukrainians and some foreign journalists, but mostly Ukrainians, families walking around those tanks. Children were climbing those tanks, although there were, of course, tables saying do not climb because it could be dangerous, but still everyone climbed them and took pictures. So it felt good. And then when I actually reached, I was walking down the Khrushchev Street, and then I reached Maidan Nezalezhnosti, and people were singing and dancing there. Just as far as I understand, somehow spontaneously, someone had musical instruments, and people began dancing together. And I filmed a little bit of it, and it was a very popular tweet and among, you know, people in the West, because as far as I understand, you there also want to see us, that we have some, of course, the war is going on and horrible things continue happening, but at the same time, there is some result. And in Kyiv, people can dance sometimes and then go back to work, maybe go back to the front line or documenting war crimes or whatever. But we also have lives, and this is important. The other thing is that I don't think that when you have empathy and when you really want to help Ukraine, that you have to, you know, scroll the news the whole day. This doesn't help. You do not have to absorb all this pain, because there's too much pain. You cannot absorb it and even survive. So you just, I would advocate for just putting Ukraine into your schedules. Like, I will donate to Ukraine regularly. I will follow the news regularly, but like check in, I don't know, once a day, but not all the time, etc., etc. And this way you can, because this is a long fight. This will not, you know, I don't think that this will end soon, because Russia has, we have a joke that the Russian army is not good, but it's very long. So that's why we need to stay. We need you to stay with us, and we need you to stay sane. So you don't have to absorb all the pain that we're experiencing here. But please just put us in your schedules and stay with us for till our victory, actually.
But, you know, Victoria, that joke just reminds me that I never heard more jokes than when I was in Sarajevo during the siege, because that's one of the ways that people keep their wits about them. And what it also reminds me of is that wars tend to bring out not only the worst in people, but also the best. And people invent new ways of being in the world. And the American literature professor I mentioned, one of the things he did during the siege was a new private radio station was created in Sarajevo called Radio Zed, Radio Wall. And the man who was running it asked Zvonko if he wanted to have a show. And Zvonko loved country Western music. And so he invented a show called Sarajevo Country Club, because, as he liked to say, country music knows no ethnicity, at least in Bosnia. It doesn't care if you're a Muslim, a Serb, Croat. It's just music. And he always ended the show. He did it once a week, and he never missed a show, by saying, "Don't give up hope. That's what they," and by they he meant the Serbs ringing the city, "that's what they want you to do." So part of what I think writers can do in such circumstances is to seek out those stories that are a little bit to the side, that are as much about the daily life, the quotidian, as they are about the ways in which people adapt to these new and horrible circumstances in sometimes amazingly creative ways.
Can I just jump on that? Down the road, one of the most meaningful things that I did, and actually I had taken some time off work, but I was still, employed as a reporter, but I asked for some time off, and I taught Afghans to document their own lives. A friend of mine started a very popular, massively popular program here called This American Life. So I called my program in Afghanistan, My Afghanistan Life. And I was with an NGO called Internews for a couple of months when I did this. And so each student, and I had 12, and they ranged in age from 16 to 55. I taught them how to ask questions of their lives, how to interview their friends and themselves, how to sort through memories. But they got stories that, as a Western journalist, I could never, ever have gotten. And I was telling Chris, who I've known for a long time, the other day about one young man who had been 18 when the Taliban was in power in Herat, had been forced to partake in a stoning. The entire town had to partake in the stoning of this woman accused of adultery. She survived. The lover survived, the husband survived, the mother survived. We sent him back to interview all those people, and they were all amazingly willing to speak. So that's what I'm saying. This isn't going to end even when that very long army is in your rear view mirror, as we like to say. And I do love hearing this gallows humor, because I think it just helps us keep our sanity when we're looking at things that you can barely put into a report because they're so unspeakable, And of course, you don't describe the horrible smells of the dead and and the blood splashing up the walls, and things that occasionally, just I'll be driving and still drift through my mind. But thinking of My Life as Afghanistan, we broadcast that. That was empowering to them. Those stories of their survival through the war and beyond. And now now it must be done all again. I mean, some of the most despairing people I'm talking to now are people who've had to leave Afghanistan, who thought they had, a future there. So the ways that we encapsulate, is that the word? The ways that we percolate these stories, frame them, stitch them together, give them life. You know, it's a little bit like Frankenstein, maybe, but we have to do it. If you're a writer, you have to do it. If you're a documentarian, you have to do it. And if you're a humanitarian, you have to look at it, you know, and we have to teach all people to be humanitarians. I know that sounds kind of preachy, but I think it's accurate.
I would also jump in and add that, of course, in Ukraine, the situation is almost unprecedented because it's, I think, for the first time in a while when absolutely an independent state was attacked by a state which is so much bigger and with so much longer army, etc. And in this case, we do have a situation where the victory of Ukraine would mean something to the world, and the defeat would be just a disaster, basically, because it's a fight between democracy and autocracy. And this is what we didn't have, I think, and I'm afraid, in Afghanistan or Yugoslavia. There was a bit different. And right now we are finally back to the situation where there's black and white. And by the way, it's not very convenient for good literature, because in good literature, you should portray like there are many shades, and war is just inherently bad, whatever. But it's not the case here. Here it's absolutely different, and the best choice one can make is actually join the army. And this is a black and white situation. And it's so new even for us, because we also, used to all those postmodern novels where this seemed absolutely impossible to say that there's evil and there's good, and we just have to side with the good. So it's very new, I think.
And I think because of this black and white situation, Zelensky is doing so great job, because he's not a good actor. That's why everyone just adores him and fond of him, because it's easy to be a hero in this situation, because it's clear distinguish between good and bad, between black and white. And when you head in the army of light and you defeat in the darkness, you be as a bad actor. It's I think the best role of Volodymyr Zelensky in his whole life, and he would never thought maybe that becoming a president he would ever play this crucial and most important role in his life, and life has played this joke with him.
And it's a good thing he has a sense of humor, so that he would know what to quip at appropriate moments. Like, I don't need a ride, I need more ammo. I wonder if Victoria and Roman, if you could speak a little bit about two things on our minds. One, the presence or lack thereof of the UN in this conflict. I know that today the inspectors from the IAEA are on the way out to the nuclear power plant to see how disastrous the situation is. But we're interested in what you think the UN's role should be in this war, and we know you've documented. I think, Victoria, you said something like 30,000 war crimes now. What hopes you have for all these war criminals, all finding justice, if there will be an accounting, and what that accounting might look like?
Yeah, I think that generally Roman will answer about the UN, and I would just like to comment that 30,000 is what General Prosecutor's Office reports now. So different NGO teams also independently document different number of war crimes. So 30,000 is General Prosecutor's Office number. Roman, would you please? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a sad story to speak about the UN. UN has proven its total not incompetence, but inability to react in any way, but to just maybe proclaim some statements which will lead to nothing. and the whole structure that has been established after the World War II and with whole UN thing that has been established to prevent war from being unfolded in future, they totally failed, and no one looks at the direction of the UN anymore, especially in Ukraine. We can't rely on this institution. We can't expect any of the peace builders to be sent by the UN. We can't expect any kind of influence that UN can apply to Russia to stop this war. Everyone remembers how when Antonio Guterres has visited Kyiv for the first time during this full-scale invasion, Russia has launched a missile strike on Kyiv while he was in the city, just to show how little they care about the UN and the Secretary General of the UN being presented in the city. So they just launched this attack.
And I think this is just what I was talking about, was saying that this war is not just between Russia and Ukraine, but this is a war between democracy and autocracy, and this is a war for rule of law, although the war itself actually destroys rule of law. What we are fighting for is rule of law. This is why it is important that we document all the war crimes, because even if we win and afterwards we cannot restore justice, when we cannot prove anything, we cannot at least do our best to find and punish all the perpetrators, then we still lost. Of course, it's important to get back territory to save people's lives, but it is also important for us to restore the rule of law and to have all the Europeans to believe in the rule of law and have international institutions that really help us to live peacefully, because this was our dream from the start, right? This is the very reason why Russia is attacking us, because we want to have democracy and rule of law, not because we would like to join NATO, but because we chose democracy and this doesn't work for them, and of course because we chose not to be Russians. So this is very important, I think, what Roman is saying.
I would just maybe add that it's not only a war between good and bad people, it's a war between different universes, and you can't approach to Russia with the same legal tools, for instance, like, all right, we've documented this horrible war crime and you have to react somehow. No one will ever react. We haven't seen any single situation when higher commander of Russian army has reacted at the atrocities, at the clear, brutal violation of the international humanitarian law being perpetrated by the soldiers. The only reaction we can expect is they put medals on their chests for doing this, for committing this. And all this talks about the accountability and punishment and rule of law, it just stops where the territory controlled by Russians starts. And you can't overcome this wall. And the only way now to prevent the war crime from being committed is not putting someone behind the bars. We already saw, and we will see many trials when Russian soldiers will be put on behind the bars for 15 years, for life term even. But this won't prevent other Russian soldiers from committing war crimes. They just absolutely doesn't care about themselves, and especially they don't care about Ukrainians as well. So the only way is for war crimes, to prevent war crimes from being committed in future, is to literally knock out weapon off the hands of Russian soldier, and then we will reach the situation where there will be no more war crimes. That's why me and my colleagues, we sometimes really feel miserable for continuing doing documentation and traveling to the conflict-affected areas and so on. We feel that we should really join the army and bullets to the direction of Russian troops, because it's the only way. At the same time, many people try to join us join our team because they feel the same while being on a different places on a different work. So they would abandon their work and join Truth Hounds to do something, to do more to help Ukraine win this war. And at the same time, we sometimes feel desperate, like feeling miserable for doing this. I think sometimes it's not a method to prevent these horrible things to happen.
Roman, I'm really glad you talked about the personal tests, the personal stress and trauma that you experience in doing your work, because if you can't talk about that, then I would really worry that you would not be able to sustain it. And I was really struck yesterday, earlier this week, Victoria was speaking to Penn, and you are documenting all of these people who have joined the fight, you know, journalists and lawyers and other people. And I remember, and the UN was impotent in Iraq too. I mean, Sergio Vera de Mello was blown up in August of 2003 with the truck bombs. But my own, again, so we had a number of Iraqis, including my friend who I spoke about a little earlier, who decided that they would become truth tellers, that they would become journalists. And my friend had been a doctor. I met him my very first night, that journey to Baghdad. He was unable to save a woman who had been burned. And I felt guilty that he was going to leave medicine, because clearly he was needed as a doctor, but he became one of the only Iraqis directly reporting for an American press entity. It was Scripps. And anyway, and later he was the very one who was killed by an American soldier so Yasser had like this horrible trajectory of the war: invasion, resistance, helping, committing to something new, and ultimately losing his life. But it has not been a life that's been forgotten, in the sense that through what we did, the Army War College and the Center for Lessons Learned and Harvard School of Human Rights all took that story, have used it in their curriculum. In fact, David Petraeus used that story when they released the civilian version of about counterinsurgency. So I guess it's a juggling act, you know, the days where you feel almost overcome and the days where you feel, well, at least I've extracted these truths. So I really just applaud that you do this juggling and continue.
Yeah, people make different choices here, and we've seen a lot of people to turn to journalism since 2015 to document war crimes, or actually just being journalists, for example, in the occupied Crimea. And on one hand, I know those journalists who are now political prisoners in Russia because they documented those crimes that Russia committed at the occupied territory. At the same time, I know that Truth Hounds and Roman's colleagues and Roman went to document those crimes that was happening in Crimea, and to those very journalists. But at this time, I also know human rights defenders, lawyers, and war crimes documenters who just joined the army, and we all can understand them. As Roman said, every one of us would like to just go and fight. At the same time, I know, for example, a information security expert from Kharkiv who stayed in Kharkiv for all those days, and she decided to become a journalist. So she's now just making videos and posting them on Twitter, and she was covering Kharkiv in March, where when there were not so many journalists ready to go to the most dangerous places. So people also do make this choice of becoming journalists right now as well. It's just that every one of us is trying to find a role in which we would be the most helpful and would contribute to the victory in the best way.
It occurs to me that to go back to Victoria's notion about things being black and white, probably not since the Second World War has the world faced such a civilizational event, an event that has the capacity to change the course of civilization. And remembering that 2 of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, Russia and China, are authoritarian nations, that reminds us what the limits may be from that international institution. But I take heart from just the sheer number of citizen journalists Victoria and Roman have trained over this war, the development of this cadre of people going out and documenting war crimes. If nothing else, they will be able to name and shame those who may end up being beyond the reach of the law, but who will forever walk this earth as criminals, as war criminals. And the final thing I want to say is there anything that we've missed that we should, from Victoria and Roman, that you think listeners should be knowing about here at this 6-month moment in the war?
I think that not only thing, but I know that this war is the most documented conflict in the world because it's all happening online. And the seconds after something happened, there will be information in the internet. When I was driving here to Oslo, I was passing by Ukrainian town that was hit 2 times by Russian missiles. It was Sarny. Where I was passing by Sarny, I stopped in the forest to clear the windshield because it before the dark, and I heard 2 powerful explosions, and I started just checking the Telegram channels and asked my colleagues, and in 2 minutes there will already been published information about what has been struck, what destruction. So there were reports from both Ukrainian and Russian side. So Ukrainian reported that 4 civilians were killed in that attack, and Russian claimed they have hit the repair facilities in the outskirts of the town. So the smoke from explosions was just started to up into the skies, and the information about the strike was everywhere in the internet already. So for those who do want to know what's happening, there are plenty of chances to that. Of course, I'm not saying that everyone should only scroll the news and being fully involved into this. If any of the listeners of the podcast is interested in, they of course can join any Telegram channel and see as fast as they want to. If they want some analysis and the results of the investigation, they can always refer to our website, because we are publishing the investigations. Just yesterday, the day before yesterday, we have published a report about missile strike on Mykolaiv back in March. On March 29th, the Russian vessel Admiral Essen has launched a cruise missile that the premises of the administrative building of Mykolaiv, killing 37 people there. So we have been there, we've visited the place, we have reconstructed the whole attack, the trajectory of the missile, we have talked to witnesses, and we have painted the whole picture of this another war crime.
And you have that both in Ukrainian and in English, right?
Right, yeah.
You know, you talked, Roman, about maybe what happens when they go home is just more medals on their chest. I think for all of us to remember, whatever part of this work we're doing, is that, and Chris talked about it a moment ago, is that shame also continues and sometimes comes after the heat of conflict. And I'm thinking of the man who fired the gun, who killed my friend. And we tracked him down. We tracked the soldier down. And I've always thought that two people's lives were taken that day, because although he did not materially, he did go to prison within the military, although it wasn't for that. But when he was released, his life was never the same. And I can't believe that the lives of some of these Russians will be the same either. I think that the Ukrainian people have the high ground, and we will help to make sure that you are heard and always have it.
Yeah.
Sorry, I need to take off now because I will present the Mariupol's 2 documentary being presented here in Oslo at the film festival, and I will be speaking before the film starts with the audience. So it was a pleasure to talk to you and see you.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Roman.
Thank you so much, Roman. Thank you so much, Roman.
And I will just tell you that I have wonderful plans for this weekend. This Saturday, I plan to go to one of the villages which was just recently occupied by Russians, but now it's liberated. So, of course, I will encounter a lot of horrible things there, and witnesses will be telling stories of unspeakable. But still, this is good that we're finally able to enter some of the villages in the Kherson region, and we are sure that we can win. At the same time, I would like international law to not only defend those who win, right, but just to be on the right side of history anyway. At the same time, we do have to win, and in order to stop war crimes happening on all the occupied territories, including Donetsk, Lugansk, and Crimea, and there war crimes have been happening for years now. So finally, we have a chance to stop the suffering, and it's impossible until it's done. And please keep supporting Ukraine. Please keep sending us weapons. This is what we need, and this is what writers, journalists, human rights defenders, lawyers are asking from Ukraine. We do need weapons. We do need sanctions. And with this, we will be able to win and stop all those war crimes from happening, because we cannot document any more of them already too much. So we have to just stop it.
My heart with yours, Victoria. Slava Ukraini.
Heroin slava.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so very much, Victoria, Roman, Jackie, and Chris, to our Ukrainian friends. We wish you victory. We wish you safety. To my American friends, thank you so much for engaging in this difficult question, for being here with us. We're all grateful to you. Stay safe, everyone.